Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Audit and Governance Committee today. First of all, can I ask any apologies for the absence? Third.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from councillors Dave Chapman, Abbas Hussain and Javeria Hussain.
Thank you. Anybody got a chance to read the minutes, the last one? Agreed? Thank you. Any disclosure of interest? None. Any urgent business?
Chair.
Thank you. Can I go to agenda item 6, external audit plan update?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. I mean, members of this committee will be aware at the last meeting that you received a position statement from EY setting out ongoing lines of inquiry associated with historic audits of the Council's accounts for the 18-19 and 19-20 financial year, but also the ongoing work required under the changes to the National Audit Office Code of Audit Practice to look at value for money arrangements for 2021 financial year onwards. Obviously, members of this committee will be well aware of the significant decisions that the Council are taking around the support and stabilisation to Cllr, and its recent executive meeting considered a number of reports setting out the basis of decisions that the Council intends to take. The reason for the verbal update is that, of course, a lot of information has been provided by the Council in response to our lines of inquiry, and at this stage we're not in a position to provide a written report of our response to those lines of inquiry. The previous Audit and Governance Committee, I think the agreed action was that there would be an extraordinary meeting of this committee at the point at which that work was concluded, and I'm very happy to still commit to do that. I think it's important that you get a clear statement from me that we are clearly, as the external auditors, intending to conclude our historic audits as soon as practically possible, and we're working to obtain all the rest of the information and explanations that we need from the Council, and then to run through our own professional practice and consultation processes within the audit firm before we arrive at our final audit reporting. And once we're close to that position, I will, through the Section 151 officer, I will agree an appropriate date that we should be setting up a meeting to bring our final written report back to this meeting. And I think I'm obviously happy to take any questions, but I think through you, Chair, that's about all I can say at this particular moment in time.
Thank you very much. Any questions you want to take? Or? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have an approximate date for when the meeting will be? Is it possible to have an estimate? Or?
Well, obviously, I think we're looking to conclude things as much as we can during the course of August. I think we are all working extremely hard on all sides to move this on, because we know the importance of closing historic audits. And I think that, so I suppose that's all I would say. I know you've got a meeting of this committee on the 1st of September. Whether we're in a position to hit that is something that I would want to talk to the Section 151 officer about. If we don't hit that, then we would want to set up an extraordinary meeting as soon after that as possible.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. Can I go to agenda item 7, internal audit report 2020-21? Concha, thank you.
Good evening, members. So the Internal Audit Annual Report is an update on the work the Audit Service have carried out during the financial year 2020 and to provide an opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's control environment. It is the responsibility of management to establish and maintain an appropriate control environment. The role of internal audit is to form an independent and objective opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of systems of internal control. The main body of the report is attached at Appendix 1, but the main point to note from the report is that based on the internal audit work we have carried out during 2021, whilst we've noted some concerns in some areas, we have provided an adequate level of assurance on the overall Council's control environment. For 2021, we've also noted a reduction in the number of individual audits given a limited assurance opinion when compared to the previous year, and also an improvement in the standards of internal control, where the opinion for 6 out of 8 previous limited assurances have now been raised to adequate assurance. I would just like to run through some of the key parts of the report in Appendix 1, which is at page 14 onwards. If I could take you through Section 3, which is on page 16. Section 3 summarises the audit work which has been undertaken to formulate the annual audit opinion. So the annual audit opinion is risk-based. It is prepared in consultation with management, including a review of the risk registers and known areas of risk, and it was approved by CLMT and Audit Committee back in March last year. It is intended to be indicative of the work that will be done during the year, but changes are inevitable. In terms of the number of days, it's 1,200. The plan has been set at 1,200 days, and it is anticipated that this is based around a full complement of staff. During the year, the committee were provided with regular updates on the ongoing recruitment issues within the team and the impact this will have on the completion of the annual audit plan. At the time, we expected to complete 80% of the audit plan, but I am pleased to say that we have completed 85% of the audit plan. I must say at this point, that the work that the internal audit team have done, considering the in-year vacancies and also dealing with the impact of the pandemic, to achieve 85% is quite an achievement. Section 3.9 of the report on page 17, there's a table which illustrates the number of opinions we've issued during the year. So we've issued 60 reports in final, and of those 4 received a limited assurance opinion, which I will come back to in a few moments. We also undertake governance and risk management audit reviews, and paragraph 3.13 details the pragmatic approach we took last year in terms of doing a single audit review of COVID-19 governance. This was a high-level review to determine the effectiveness of the Council's governance and risk management arrangements in place and the controls to manage the impact of COVID-19. In making our assessment, we held discussions with key officers and also issued a risk survey to services to assess the impact of COVID-19 on controls. Overall, we identified that the Council has effective governance arrangements in place to successfully deal with and continue to deal with the impact of COVID-19. The report provides some best practice that we've given in terms of examples around the effectiveness of the controls. During the year, we also undertook post-assurance work to review the Council's processes in place to defray the COVID-19 grants and, where applicable, certify that expenditure was in accordance with the terms and conditions. Further post-assurance work will continue into this financial year. 3.19, that details the risk horizon scanning exercise, which was delivered by the Council's insurers, and the outcomes of that exercise in terms of the key themes which were identified by participants. This information was used to identify next steps to address the Council's risk horizon, many of which had already been addressed as part of the Council's response to COVID-19 through existing monitoring and review processes in place. CLMT are currently undertaking a formal review of all corporate risks to ensure their ongoing relevance and whether they are aligned to the new strategic priorities within the corporate plan, and also to identify and address any gaps or emerging risks. As part of our assurance work, we also place reliance on the in-year statement of governance completed by service directors, and a review of the governance statements did not identify any new significant areas of concern on the Council's control environment. Paragraph 3.26 on page 20 onwards This contains an update in terms of all of the follow-up audit reviews that we carried out on the audits which received a limited assurance. I would just like to refer to the 4 which are still limited at this point in time. If we could go to table 5. So at the last committee, we provided an update on the procurement and contract management audit reports, which received a limited assurance opinion. The original audit review was carried out in June 2020, and we identified some significant internal control weaknesses where services had not complied with procurement procedures. At that point in time, we noted that the council no longer had access to the old e-procurement system, which meant that we were unable to confirm if the correct procurement procedures had been followed due to insufficient evidence at that point in time. There were also some gaps in the contracts register, which had been identified, and in one case, we also noted a breach in relation to the procurement regulations where the spend with the supplier was in excess of the financial threshold. We therefore provided a limited assurance opinion on that piece of work. Since the initial work, we have completed several exercises, and we've noted an issue specifically in relation to the light touch regime. So this is where services have been spot placing with certain providers, and over a 4-year period, we've actually exceeded a financial threshold, which means that we are now in breach of the public contracts regulations. At the point in time where we spend above a certain financial threshold, we should have undertaken a more structured approach to procurement and followed a more formal approach, whether that's through establishing a framework agreement or formalising overarching contracts in place. Since the review have been undertaken, the corporate procurement team, they have undertaken a number of steps to strengthen internal controls. They've introduced new comprehensive procurement procedures. They've also introduced standardised checklists, and they do monthly spot checks to ensure that services are complying with policies and procedures. The historical gaps within the contracts register have also been rectified. Full Council have also approved a change to the Council standing orders in terms of the Council's approach under the light touch regime, with particular reference to the transparency, oversight and governance of spot placements for adults and children's. In addition to this, steering groups have also been set up to oversee this work and ensure compliance with procedures. We have also acknowledged as part of our follow-up report that the corporate procurement team have made considerable progress to strengthen the Council's approach to procurement and to address the internal control weaknesses identified during our previous 2 reviews. However, due to the extent of the number of breaches we've identified, our limited assurance opinion remains at this point in time, and we will be carrying out a further physical follow-up review on this area of work. The second limited assurance opinion relates to rent deposits. That's table 6 in the report. As part of the follow-up review that we carried out, we noted that limited progress had been made to address the internal control weaknesses identified in our original audit report. The majority of the recommendations had not been implemented, as the service had proposed revisions to the operation of the scheme, but at the time of the audit review, the proposed revisions had not been agreed. Under the existing scheme, we felt that the controls should have been strengthened, so the limited assurance remains at this point in time. Table 7, this is the third limited assurance opinion we've provided, and this is to do with homelessness and temporary accommodation. The key weaknesses we identified as part of this review was in relation to system functionality issues, which resulted in a combination of various systems and spreadsheets which were used to record and monitor homelessness applications and placements. We felt that in addition to creating inefficiencies within the processes, this also weakened the audit trail and also resulted in potential inconsistencies in the information used for monitoring, reporting and decision-making processes. Our sample testing also identified there was no independent senior officer review of assessments, and we also noted several instances where relief duty had not been resolved within the required 56 days, and personal housing plans were also not regularly being reviewed and followed up. At the time of the audit review, the service had obtained executive approval to implement a fit-for-purpose IT system for homelessness, which will improve performance management and accountability. And this system is now actually in place, so we hope to go back and do a follow-up audit review to see how that is working. Since the audit review, 2 teams have also been merged within housing, which will help to introduce a seamless management process for homelessness assessments. There has also been a wide training programme for staff, and it is also understood that the backlog has now been more manageable because of the 2 teams merging, and the caseload is also being monitored on a weekly basis. A checklist has also been introduced, which will be signed off by an authorising manager to monitor that process. The 4th limited assurance is building and technical services. That's in table 8. So this was a review which was carried out in June 2020, and some weaknesses were identified around BTS's governance arrangements, particularly around separation of duties between management responsibility for the operation and client team, contracts which were awarded which have been in place for a number of years, and there was no system in place for jobs to be costed. The above weaknesses in the system resulted in a limited assurance opinion. Again, since the audit review was undertaken, management have identified that the current structure delivers economies of scale in that there's no need to duplicate the functions of the 2 units. There's also agreed performance monitoring in place between BTS and the client side. An SLA is also now in place to formalise the arrangements. And we also understand that BTS supports the Council's wider strategic objectives in regard to local wealth building, has a strong social value in terms of local employment, training, apprenticeship, which should be considerations for commissioning work, and the whole job costing model is partly implemented and being tested. Our physical follow-up review is currently in progress, and we hope to provide the committee with a further update once this work has been completed. Paragraph 3.28, this deals with the follow-ups that we have carried out during the year. So we have followed up on all of the recommendations. Our target is to implement 75% of all agreed recommendations. At this point in time, only 69% of that target has been achieved and recommendations have been fully met. We understand that this is due to delays in some departments fully implementing recommendations due to the impact of COVID-19 and their response to the pandemic being a priority. Section 6 of the report, that's on page 31. This details a statement on conformance with the public sector internal audit standards and the results of our quality assurance and improvement programme. So the internal audit service is required to work to the standards prescribed by SIAS. The internal assessment we carried out identified that we generally conform with the majority of the standards, as well as the definition, core principles and the code of ethics. There are 2 outstanding recommendations which we hope to implement this financial year. The first is in relation to the development of an assurance map, which will help to identify both internal and external reviews and other processes which will provide assurance and assist with our audit planning process. And the second action is in relation to an independent review of the performance of the Audit and Governance Committee in line with SIPF's best practice. If I can go back to the recommendation at the beginning of the audit report for the committee to note the audit report and also the annual audit opinion. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kancha. Any questions? Yes, Underwood, please.
Thank you, Chair. I can Sean. Page 24 for the procurement and contract management follow-up review. It says the breach of procurement regulations identified in the June 2020 review has also been addressed and the provider accepted into the Council's dynamic purchasing system framework. Is there any reason why the provider wasn't in that framework before that date?
So the provider had refused to originally join the framework in the first instance. So when the initial contract had ended, they refused to join the new purchasing system. There was some consultation undertaken after the event to encourage them to join, which they have now done so.
And had they been in that framework before, would most of these problems or any of these problems not have occurred? What would have been the situation?
So in the initial circumstances, the old, I believe it was the private sector leasing contract had came to an end. And so we had to go through a new procurement exercise and establish a new framework agreement in place. I believe that some providers refused to join the framework because they were not happy with the way the scheme operated, which is why they didn't join the scheme. Since then, there have been some further consultations and the provider's now been accepted onto the contract and they've agreed to come onto the framework now.
Okay, so we don't insist that providers join that framework then.
So in terms of compliance with the procurement regulations and the spend that we have with the providers, we should have a formal arrangement in place. So if the provider continued to refuse to join that particular framework, then we would have had to have some kind of exit strategies in place. Because that was in relation to temporary accommodation, it was more difficult to come out of those arrangements straight away. So which is why there's been a gap in terms of putting them onto the framework and kind of encourage them to do that. But otherwise, there would have been some exit strategies in place to manage that situation going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Underwood. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Kancha, for your report. The next item agenda is corporate risk update. Audit manager, I think Kancha again, yeah?
Thank you. So the next report is the corporate risks update report, and this is an update on the authority's corporate risks. If I can take you to paragraph 8 of the report on page 55. So the COVID-19 pandemic has been an unprecedented public health emergency, and local authorities have played a major part in the national response to the pandemic whilst continuing to deliver existing services. It has also presented significant challenges, including unprecedented additional pressures on finances, enormous social and economic impact, and long-term effects on individuals' health and well-being. CLMT are currently undertaking a formal review of all corporate risks to ensure their ongoing relevance, whether they are aligned to the new strategic priorities within the corporate plan, and to identify and address any gaps or emerging risks. At the time of writing this report, the review and refresh of the corporate risk register was currently in progress. So this provides a current position statement, if you like, in terms of where we are with corporate risks. There are currently 32 risks on the risk register, and since the last update to this committee, 12 risks have been reviewed and amended by the risk owners. 3 risks have been transferred to the departmental risk registers, and 1 risk has been withdrawn. There are currently 10 high priority risks, and the table at section 11 details those 10 high priority risks together with the control measure update. In summary, these relate to failure to keep to the approved budget, failure to recruit, retain staff, loss or collapse of key IT applications, and unauthorised access to personal data on the council systems as a result of cyber attack. The current demand profile, poverty and looting, continues to result in overspend on the agreed budget. Louth's financial performance and position deteriorates, causing reduction of income to the council. Luton Council needs to safeguard vulnerable children and adults from all forms of extremism and the threat of radicalisation. Failure to achieve the emission reduction target of 2040 of net zero carbon. Failure to improve the decline and look of the town centre. The impact of COVID on the health and wellbeing of Luton Council staff, affecting the ability to deliver core services. Business growth and productivity are facing a decline within the current pandemic and economic downturn. And in terms of paragraphs 12 and 13, they detail that the corporate risks are actually monitored by the risk owners and they're reported regularly to the Internal Governance Group, CLMT and this committee. The Council's risk management system also issues automatic reminders to risk owners to update their risks when they become due, and e-learning training is also available to all staff, and risk training is also scheduled corporately for all members on an annual basis. If I can go back to the recommendation of the report to provide an update. Sorry, the committee is recommended to review the Council's corporate risk register, and again, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kancha. Any questions? Not this. Oh, yes, Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. One of the risks is failure to achieve the emission reduction target of 2040 of net zero carbon. Should climate change be an ongoing risk rather than just the chance of missing the 2040 target? Isn't there a risk of ongoing climate change having an effect on the lives of people in the town? So, for example, if we have a heat wave that could attribute to climate change that affects the health of the people.
So these are the wordings. I think it's probably linked into the corporate plan objectives, I believe, but it's something that I can take back to the risk owner to have a look at the wording and then come back to you if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Underwood, yeah. Hannah, any question?
Thanks for the report, Katjan. So regarding obviously the 12 risks, some of them have obviously gone from an 8 high to a 9 high. So is the fact that they're going higher worrying? Because obviously we're trying to aim for them to go lower.
So as part of the corporate refresh exercise, all of the risk owners have reviewed their risks, and some of them, there were some inconsistencies in the way the inherent risks were scored. So you'd probably notice that some of them have been increased because the risk is actually high, but they do have controls in place to mitigate those risks. So it's just a case of reviewing those risks and those scores and saying, well, does it make sense?
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Kanchan. Can I go to next item, number 9, shared anti-fraud service report? I think it's from Nick, isn't it?
Good evening, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I've also got my colleague Darren with me tonight as well.
Okay.
So good evening, Chair and members. Yeah, I'm Nick Jennings. I work for the Shared Anti-Fraud Service. It's a shared service that the council joined in 2016. We're based at Hertfordshire County Council offices in Stevenage. Darren, I'm not sure if he's with me. I can't see on my screen at the minute whether he's with me or not, but if you're there, Darren, say hello.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members.
Good stuff.
Good evening.
Just a quick introduction to SAFS for those members that are new to the Audit Committee. We provide a variety of functions for the council, from helping to develop policies and processes to deter fraud, providing fraud awareness training for staff and members. We promote the use of data and data analytics to help prevent and identify fraud quickly. And we work with the council to issue public and internal communications to help deter fraud. And finally, we undertake the investigation and prosecution of fraud where other defences have failed us. So, Chair, tonight my report covers the details of the work conducted by my service and by council officers in 2020 and 2021 to deliver the anti-fraud plan for that year, and then the performance of KPIs for my service as well. And it should be noted, first of all, that the report covers a lot of the anti-fraud activity that SAFS promotes, but there is just as much, if not more, business as usual work undertaken by council officers to help deter and prevent fraud occurring in the first instance. And it's very much a joined up approach when we're dealing with fraud at the council. I'll take it the report's been read by members and just jump around some key points to sort of bring to committee members' attentions. My report begins at page 66 of your bundle. The anti-fraud plan for 2020-21 can be found at Appendix A. That's on page 78 of your report. I'm not going to talk about the plan for last year very much, just around the work that we did. So as you probably all recall, the country went into lockdown in mid-March 2020 due to COVID-19. That necessitated a need for us to review our plan that we had just put in place earlier that month with a focus on awareness and prevention. We thought that would be a key piece of work for us during 2020. Probably the early part, we didn't expect it to last as long as we did. The issues we faced were how to deliver awareness and ensure prevention during a lockdown with the vast majority of the staff, the council and our own, working from home and under pressure to deliver services whilst responding to the emerging local and national response to the pandemic. And our report includes guidance and advice that we were provided with either from government or from the sector, how we shared those with officers. Some of it was very general fraud prevention advice, other it was much more specific, including the government's COVID-19 counter fraud measures toolkit, which we shared with officers at the council to assist in putting in place measures to prevent fraud occurring in the first instance. One area in particular where there was a fantastic response by council officers to deliver grants to local businesses forced to lock down or forced to close as a result of lockdown, The council paid out, as you'll be aware, millions of pounds to thousands of local businesses through a variety of schemes introduced in 2020 and then rolling through into the early part of this year as well. Our role in that was to ensure those schemes were secure and that eventual fraudsters could not take advantage of the money that was the council was handling at that time. To date, we're not aware of any successful attacks against Luton Council. We know there are attempts, and in the report we detail some of those, but the work of officers ensured that the right money got to the right people at the right time, and I think that's a great example of the prevention in practice at a very, very difficult time for the authority. So very, very pleased with the work that officers were doing at that time. On awareness, we increased our communication to senior management of frontline services, highlighting new and emerging, often ingenious fraud threats that we were seeing, particularly focused on the COVID schemes. We issued more alerts in 2020-21 than in 2 previous years combined, as criminal gangs across the world and more opportunities that local residents sought to take advantage of those schemes to divert funds away from genuine businesses. As well as increased awareness and training for staff, we also released 2 campaigns, public campaigns in 2020, encouraging the public to report fraud where they suspected it, and the response was excellent. Referrals across Luton increased to an all-time high. We see that as a real positive, as it indicates that the public have confidence in the council to deal with fraud and take appropriate action where they see it. Just touching on KPIs briefly, these are on page 69 of the report. We didn't, although we achieved the vast majority of our KPIs last year, we just missed out on one area on 5B, and part of the reason for that is recovery of properties last year for the council was quite difficult. It was difficult for us to conduct investigations, and obviously the government had made a decision about social housing and people quite rightly not being evicted from their homes during lockdown. So that impacted on our ability to achieve that target. We still closed 92 cases in the year and identified savings around £360,000, as well as a loss, unfortunately, of 1.3 million, which is all subject to recovery at present. So we are working with council officers to ensure that's brought back into the authority in a number of ways. And we do mention some of those cases again in the main body of the report. Just need to mention, not to cause Kanchan any blushes, but the work that the internal audit team did and the rest of officers dealing with the National Fraud Initiative between October 2020 and February 21. And we're now working closely with officers to look at the output from that report. And I know Kanchan will report on that separately to this committee. And lastly, Chairman, if I can just provide the briefest references to pages 74 and 75. This is our current work, so work undertaken since April this year. We've got nearly 60 new cases reported to us for investigation. We've got 140 live investigations ongoing at the moment with a value of around £1.1 million. And we've closed 25 cases so far this year, including the recovery of 5 properties and around £250,000 in loss and savings identified. And then a page, very last thing, Chair, pages 76 and 77, we listed some additional reading material for members. There's quite a long list. It's quite a boring list. It's really is essential bedtime reading if you're struggling to sleep at the moment. But I do need to commend 2 of those publications to all members of the committee. Those are the Local Government Association publication, Councillors' Workbook on Bribery and Fraud Prevention, and CIPFA's and SIFAS joint report, the Fighting Fraud and Corruption Locally Strategy for the 2020s. They really are essential reads for any member of an audit committee. And at that point, Chair, I'm more than happy to take questions from members.
Thank you. Any questions? Hannah?
But it looks like some brilliant work there that from I've read from the case study. So well done to you and your team and Kanchan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, thank you. You got anything else to report, or just done?
That's it from me, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much for your report. Yeah,
okay.
We got any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Okay, can I move to agenda item 10? It's draft statement of accounts from Dave, I think. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Chair. I will give you a verbal update where we are with the 2021 statement of accounts. So as mentioned earlier, the auditors are working on the 1819 and 1920 accounts. So that hopefully, as Neil mentioned, we are hoping to finalize those by the end of August. But at the same time, we are closing 2021 accounts. So for the year 31st of March 2021, there's a statutory requirement to produce those accounts and to publish by end of this month. So work is being done. And at this stage, those accounts will be published by end of this month and will be approved by myself as a Section 151. So, and that will include the primary statements like the balance sheet, the profit and loss account, i.e. the income expenditure, the cash flow, the group accounts, HRA, collection fund. So those are the primary prepared and published. And then soon after that, once the 1920 audit has been completed, then the audit for 2021 accounts will start by the external auditors as well. So we are planning to bring a report to the September meeting, to the audit committee, and then we'll take you through the accounts and all the changes on all the areas where members will be interested in. But there will be a paragraph on uncertainty, because right now these are the areas where we are going through a pandemic. So as any other company accounts, there'll be areas which we have to discuss in terms of uncertainty. And then once the final audit is completed, then we'll bring the final statement of accounts with the audit report. And that's the next item on the agenda. Private report will discuss about issues which auditors have raised, and we have provided our response. So at this stage, just an update to say we've made progress. The account is being prepared, and we'll be publishing the account on the council website by end of this month.
Thank you, Dev. Anybody got a question? Thank you. Before I go to agenda item 12, there's no public here, isn't it? Bert, any publics? No. 11. External audit position, statement response and update, isn't it? That's Dev as well, I think. Yeah, Dev.